Welcome, everybody. We got Bill O'Hanlon here. Welcome, Bill.
Hey,
This is so incredible. I started in preparing for this call. I was reading through your mini books. I think you have like 500, give or take a couple.
I think there's a last count it was 43, but who's count? Yeah.
Yeah, I started with the one that got you on Oprah. It was something about change one thing. What was the title of that?
One thing different.
Fantastic book. But
Thank you.
then I got distracted. I was like, oh, I want to know more about this Erickson story, like so if you don't mind just rewinding a little bit for those that are I was reading I think your book, A Remarkable Man, and it talks about your meeting, your first encounter with was it an art gallery?
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
I went to Arizona State University in the States and Arizona, it's a suburb of Arizona. It's Phoenix, Tempe, and I was a work study student. I didn't have enough money to pay for college, so I had to work my way through. And I was at the art gallery one day, and there was this woman and her daughter that came up and said, our husband, our father wants to come to the gallery. And later I found out that a patient of his had some works in the art gallery, and he wanted to go see those. And he was a psychiatrist, and I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know who it was, and they said, but it's on the third floor. Is there any way, we could get up here? There was no elevators, and it was in those dark days before they had accessibility for things.
Mm.
And so I said, well, there might be one way. They were kind of frustrated because there was no way to get up there, and he was in a wheelchair, and it was one of those old time wheelchairs. It was a heavy wheelchair. You couldn't carry it up 3 flights and carry him. He was also heavy from being in a wheelchair for so long. And so I said, we bring art pieces up to the third floor on a dolly, this ramp, with this ramp. And so they went out and looked at the ramp, and the mother and the daughter were like, no way. The guy in the wheelchair was like, yeah, I think that I could, I think that's doable. He said, I think the boy can do it. And I mean, I was 120 pounds soaking wet. I was a small guy. And he was bigger, and I say that wheelchair is, but I actually was able to get it. It was pretty steep incline, but I was able to get him up there. But I hadn't really thought through getting down, which you kind of had to. But I got him up there. He bought some Seri Indian carvings, which he collected later when I studied with him. I saw his house was full of these ironwood carvings, Native American carvings, or amazing things. And he saw his art. And so it was time to leave. I looked down at that, not quite, 70-degree incline, and I looked at him and I looked at me, and he indicated that he thought I could do it. And the wife and the daughter were like, this is the end of both of them, man. And step by step, thinking I was going to die, I got him down and helped him load into the car. And when he left, I went back to the art gallery, and one of my fellow work study students said, do you know who that was? And I said, no. He said,
No
you're
clue. Yeah.
a psychology major. You should know about this guy. He's a famous psychiatrist.
Oh, so you were a psychology major. I'm
I was a
that part.
psychology major, and
Yeah, here he is. Yeah.
I was in my third year. Now, none of my professors had mentioned this guy. He lived there, and he was, this amazing person, but no one that had ever mentioned him in my psychology studies. But talk about kismet and fate. That week in Newsweek magazine, there was an article called Spengali in Arizona.
Hmm.
Was Jay Haley's book about Dr. Erickson's work had just come out. It was called Uncommon Therapy. It was 1973. That'll carbon date me for all the people are figuring out how old I am. And I read this, and there was a story in there that it was like one of those things where it just grabbed you by the lapels, and I was like, I have to know more about this guy.
Right, right.
They're not teaching me this in psychology school. This is the weirdest thing that I've ever heard of. And how does he do this? It was like magic to me when I was reading about it.
Right,
I
right.
was like, I gotta figure out how this guy does this. So I went and sought out everything I could read about Erickson. I was a big reader. I am a big reader still. And I have to go to, interlibrary loans to find someone because there was a
Right.
lot of articles, but there weren't really many books. There was one book that, again, Jay Haley had compiled of some collected papers of Erickson or selected papers of Erickson. And they were pretty unreadable. Erickson wasn't a great writer. He was a great practitioner, wasn't a great explainer of what he did either. But I became hooked, and then gradually I worked up the courage to write him a letter and ask him. I told him I didn't have any money. By then, I was in graduate school. But by the time I'd read all that stuff, and I was in graduate school to become a psychotherapist, marriage and family therapist. And I wrote him a letter saying I don't have any money, but I worked as a gardener between undergraduate and graduate school. I could write an article about you for Psychology Today. Nobody in my program seems to know who you are. And I was living with a roommate by that point. My roommate was in law school. I was in graduate school for psychotherapy. And I went away for the weekend. My roommate, who gets up early, said the same guy has been calling every morning asking for the O'Hanlon gardening service. He calls at 7 in the morning. And when I say you're not here, you're gone for the weekend, he hangs up. He won't leave a message. So Monday morning comes, I am as usual, sleeping in. But my roommate's up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, phone rings. He comes in and gets me and says, oh, it's him. So I get on the phone and I say, hi, this is Bill O'Hanlon. He said, O'Hanlon gardening, sir. And I said, this is Bill O'Hanlon. Is this Dr. Erickson? He said, yes, this is Dr. Erickson. Don't you think you ought to survey the territory before you decide to take the job? And I said, yes. And we arranged a time for me to come out and see him. The time was when I had some classes, but I was like, forget the classes. I'm going out to Milton Erickson. And I became his gardener. I didn't have any money, and we agreed on a barter thing where I'd come out and work at his garden. He loved being out in the garden. And I worked for him to do that. And finally, to my eternal gratitude, his wife, Elizabeth Erickson, came out with a scheduler and said, Milton, the boy doesn't just want to work in the garden. He wants to have you see patients and teach him. So they started scheduling me to sit in on sessions, which I was grateful for. And it had a big influence on my life. First of all, totally confusing. He was, to me, a genius of change and of communication and of hypnosis. And I read everything I could. And when I was out there, it didn't all line up with what I'd read. He was doing things that were, verging on the supernatural to me. It was just,
Yes.
he was like a medicine man, a shaman. He could make change in the weird and mysterious ways that he did. And I dedicated myself. He died a couple of years later. That was 1977 when I started with him. He died by 1980. But I dedicated many years to figuring out what he did and making it accessible for me so I could use it in my practice and in my hypnotherapy, but also my general therapy work, and then explain it to other people. And weirdly, I was painfully shy in my younger years. I was so on fire with this stuff. I wanted to tell everybody about it, and I was a workshop presenter, which, if you would have known me at the time, you'd have said, I never talked in class when I was in college or high school. I was so shocked. And then here I am standing in front of people, shaking in my boots, but still in front of people. And after about 300 workshops, I think I just burned out my nerve cells because I just never got nervous after that. I got so comfortable. And I get caught up in the enthusiasm of telling people about this amazing work and this amazing guy and what I'd figured out about how he did what he did. And that led to a long career of traveling around the world teaching. I taught for about 30 years. I gave 3,800 or plus. I haven't stopped counting at a certain point, talks and workshops and seminars and webinars, and travel all around spreading the seeds of Dr. Erickson's work. And then I developed my own approach to psychotherapy and change. And so I wrote some books for the general public, a bunch of books for therapists. And now you know this because we've had a little prior discussion, but I put all that work online, and I've been a songwriter for the last 9 years, and loving every bit of it. And so I'm using what I learned about the creative unconscious from Dr. Erickson about how to write songs. So that's good.
That's amazing. I definitely do want to tap into how that song and music taps into that creative unconscious, because there's definitely a correlation there. And at the same time, I was jotting down some of the points. You talked about you being in school and you're like, who is this guy? Like, your teachers didn't talk about him. So where was that disconnect between what they were teaching and what he was doing?
It was, things in psychology sort of go in phases. And at that time, behavioral psychology was really, really big. As the Skinner from on up, reinforcements and contingency schedules. And I was part of that hippie generation or post hippie generation, which rebelled against all that mechanistic stuff. So then humanistic psychology came in, which was all about human potential, maybe spirituality. And so he really didn't fit in that. Psychoanalytic work, psychodynamic work had been the earlier underpinnings of most psychotherapy. And then we moved away from that. That was sort of old style, although there was still some leftover. So those were the main things. And then biological psychiatry was coming in with all the medications and brain and neurological explanations for why people had problems and solutions based on medications. And so there wasn't really room for his stuff. Plus, he didn't really have a school of psychotherapy. I mean, it's called Ericksonian sometimes, but he really wasn't much of a formularizer. He didn't like the formulas of things. So I think they just couldn't get a handle on what he did. Plus, he was so weird. When I started studying with him, some of my colleagues said, "Oh, is he still around?" Because he lived in the area. I heard he went psychotic in the 50s. And I was like, "What? That's like, God, what are you? That's really weird," because he was just so weird. His colleagues couldn't relate to him. None of the other psychiatrists liked him. I had a family therapy teacher in my graduate school who knew about him and admired his work. And so she encouraged me, but she had never been to see him. She didn't study with him. So there were a few of my graduate school professors who'd heard of him, but they didn't have most of them didn't have a great impression of him. So yeah, he was just missing. And plus, there wasn't much written by him or about him. There were, again, no school. And it was sort of schools that time. There was this Rogerian school and psychodynamic and psychoanalytic and, ego psychology and gestalt therapy and transactional. Now, everybody had a school, and he didn't really have a school. So that sort of worked against him. But then he got a few students in the 70s when I studied with him, and we became his sort of explainers and disseminators of his work. And that again led to a big career for me because people wanted to know, what the heck is Erickson doing? And I have this ability to take complex stuff and make it really clear and really simple. It's just, it's a skill that is one of my strengths and one of my superpowers. I have very few, but I use them well.
Yeah, it's a sign of a great teacher. And as you're talking, it reminds me of the movie Karate Kid, where Ralph Macchio comes and learns from the strange Mr. Miyagi guy.
It's very much like that. He's like, what does this have to do with anything? You know, oh, you just having me work. And, you know, here I am working in the garden. And, you know, I thought it was a metaphor. And I came out there dressed in my finest clothes. And he has me kneel down in his garden, weeding his roses, you know, and I ruined my nice outfit that I went out there in because I thought it was all a metaphor because I read enough about his work. I knew he used metaphors. This was no metaphor. I was working for him. Like Ralph Macchio was working for Missy Miyagi for sure.
And then you mentioned the story that caught your attention when you're in the art gallery and you're like, oh, I heard this story. What was that story so people are unfamiliar can know it? That
There's a,
magical story.
I'll tell you the story, but let me give you a preface to it.
Sure.
This was one of the things that I could not initially understand about Erickson. But it became one of the keys. I'll tell you another story if I remember to, that'll illustrate it as well. But the story was in this article in Newsweek magazine of Svengali in Arizona. They were sort of making fun of this weird guy out in Arizona who did hypnosis and was like Svengali. He seemed to have these magical abilities to influence people, but they again were kind of skeptical. But the story that I read was this woman that came to see him. And she announced very matter-of-factly that she intended to kill herself, that she'd been to see a bunch of other psychiatrists, and all they wanted to do was hospitalize her. There were medications very much in those days, but they wanted to hospitalize her because she was suicidal. And she said, you know, she told them that if they tried to hospitalize her, she'd just act like she wasn't suicidal, act normal. She knew how to do that, get out and kill herself without another thought. But she wanted someone to help her explore whether indeed she'd made the right decision, not just dismiss it out of hand like, oh, suicidal is bad. She thought she had a pretty good case that her life wasn't worth living, and she wanted someone to take a few months and explore that subject with her. And if at the end of that 3 months, she wasn't convinced that there was anything to live for, that they would just let her do it without trying to hospitalize her or stop her. Now, almost any therapist would say, I won't take that deal because, you know, you're going to kill yourself. I'll be liable. I won't be, you know, it's not good. But Erickson, he didn't follow those kind of rules. He said, okay, you know, I'll take you up on that if you agree to certain conditions. She said, okay, what are they? She said, first, that you give it the whole 3 months. She said, sure. Second, that you do everything that I ask you to do, as long as it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral. And so she said, he said, are you a person who keeps her word? She said, I always keep my word. He said, okay, I'm asked for your word on that. And, you know, the moral of that story is don't ever give your word to Erickson and she'll do every program.
Oh, yeah.
So she doesn't know what this entails, but she then takes the time to explain her situation. She was raised by parents. She was an accidental pregnancy. They didn't want her. They had folie à deux. They had their relationship, and she was an intrusion in it. They had no close relatives. They had nobody else. And they basically made her stay quiet, you know, and well-behaved for her whole childhood. She couldn't do any play dates. She just had to sit there, not even play with things because that would make a mess or make noise. And so she had this very bleak childhood in which they let her know very clearly that she was unwanted and that they were just feeding and clothing her and watering her until they could get rid of her at 18, which they did. And she went out to work. They let her know she was supposed to move out as soon as she could. She moved out. She got a menial job, you know, she didn't have any ambition. She didn't have any interests, any hobbies, no joy in her life. Her parents died in a car accident a couple of years later. She just continued to work these jobs. She was now in her late 20s. She had no idea how to relate to people. She had a bleak life. She just go to work, come home, sit there because she didn't have any hobbies or anything that caught her interest. She never learned how to live, really. And she said, you know, this life isn't worth living. I don't, you know, and I don't have any relationships. I don't have any friends. I don't see any prospects of getting married because I'm so ugly. And Erickson looked at her and she was, you know, regular looking person, not stunningly beautiful, not ugly. but she thought of herself as ugly. And he said, okay, so what is your worst feature? Now, this all of a sudden, I'm reading this thinking, what therapist would say to a person, you vital, I think she's ugly. What's your worst feature? She said, well, I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? He said, well, it might be obvious, but tell me. She said, well, and she shows him this minuscule gap in her teeth. And she thinks it looks like the Grand Canyon, that it's disfiguring. And he's like, can barely see it. But she said, that's the worst, So, but look at the rest of me. And she did dress poorly. She didn't take care of her hair. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't do her nails. She didn't dress in a flattering way. So Erickson said, all right, your first assignment is to go home and while you're in the shower, practice getting a mouthful of water and squirting it through the gap in your teeth until you can squirt and hit a target with an accuracy of 10 to 12 feet. Now, she had never heard of this kind of psychiatry or psychotherapy. This was very weird for her. But he reminded her her agreement. Do everything I ask you to do as long as it's not immoral and unethical or illegal. So she subsequently came back, and each session she reported she was getting really good at squirting the water through the gap in her teeth. He asked her about her childhood, any happy memories. She had no happy memories. He said, well, no one should die without a happy memory. She says, well, good luck. I don't see how I'm ever going to have one. He files that away, and he asked her about what she does in her work. And she said, work's okay, but it's not great. But he said, anything did you love about the work? She goes, no. She's a receptionist at a construction firm at this point, answers the phone, checks people in. Anything that bothers you about the work? She goes, it's a little boring. She said, but also there's this guy, and every time I go to the drinking fountain, this guy shows up and tries to talk to me, and I'm so embarrassed because he's going to see my mouth and how ugly I am that I quickly beat a retreat to my desk. So Erickson, of course, gets the idea. The guy's hot on her, but she can't recognize that. And so he says, okay, how much money have you got saved up? She doesn't spend it on anything because she has no hobbies. She lives alone, has worked all these years. She has about $5,000 saved up, which now would be about $100,000. I mean, it's a lot of money for, a person just sitting at the bank. And this is in the 50s. So he says, I want you to go out. I know a person who owns a beauty parlor. I want you to go and get a makeover. She goes, what's the point? It's like putting lipstick on a pig. He goes, remember, you agreed? Do anything I ask you to do. Okay. She subsequently goes and spends some of your, because who's going to inherit that money? The state. Nobody. Right. So, okay, so she ends up spending about $500 or $600 on getting a makeover, all new clothes. He sends her to a clothing store, says she doesn't have a clue, fix her up, and all this stuff. And he said, okay, now on Monday morning, I want you to put on all your new clothes, your best new clothes, fix that, do your makeup like they taught you at the beauty salon, do your hair, do your nails, do your lipstick and makeup. And when you go to work, go to the drinking fountain. And when that guy shows up, get a mouthful of water, take one step toward him, squirt that water through the gap in your teeth and hit him with it because he's been bugging you. You'll pay him back. You'll create one good memory because it'll be kind of a funny joke to play on him and you'll get revenge. And once you take one step towards him and squirt that water at him, turn around and run like hell back to your desk. She's appalled. No way is she going to do that. No way. And he reminds her of her agreement. You agree to do everything I ask you to do as long as it's not immoral, illegal, or unethical. So she's trapped. She has to do it. She does indeed show up. She does follow the instruction. One step towards him, squirts the water through the gap in her teeth, turns around and runs. And he runs after her, catches her, spins around, and gives her a kiss, which totally freaks her out. Kind of freaks him out too, so he's embarrassed. He goes back to his workplace. She is in a trance at this point. She goes to her desk, calls him up, says, Dr. Erickson, what did you do to me? I need an emergency appointment. I don't think I know who I am anymore, and I don't know anything.
Wow.
And therapy begins. That guy asks her out. She goes on a date with him. People start opening the doors for her, flirting with, her life changes. Long story short, she ends up not going out with that guy very much. She goes out with other people. She ends up getting married and having 2 kids.
As I'm getting goosebumps. Yeah.
I know. So, and I'm like, Okay, they're not teaching me this in my psychology study. What the what?
And they're still not teaching that.
No, that's true. That's true. Well, a few classes teach it because they got my books, but in other people's books. But yeah, I mean, I was like, okay, I'm all in. I gotta know how this guy knew to do that. How did he do it? What's that about? And so to go back to my preamble for the story, what this work was that almost every other approach to change that I'd ever studied worked from the outside in. The people had, bad beliefs and you were going to reprogram their thoughts or their negative beliefs. They had, bad genetics or bad biochemistry or neurochemistry, and you're going to fix it with some electroshock or medications, or you're going to rework their traumas from their child, whatever it may be. It all came from the outside. Erickson's work went from the inside out. He would use whatever people had as a resource rather than a liability. She thought the gap in her teeth was a liability. He used it as a resource. She thought not having anything to spend money on was a liability. He saw it as a resource. She thought that guy was bugging her. She saw it as a liability. He saw it as a resource. And it was like, holy moly. He just looks at people's lives and says, where are the unused resources that people aren't valuing? Even the symptoms that they present could turn into resources. Right now, they feel like and seem like liabilities. And so for me, it took me years to understand that. And sorry, I'm sort of leading and talking a lot here, but I will tell you one more story that cemented it for me.
Yeah, and go ahead, keep talking because the people listening are listening for your stories. I got written down some follow-up questions.
I got a million of them. So Dr. Erickson told me the story when I studied with him. He said that he had had a patient, and this is a long preamble, so I won't go into it, and he'd helped that patient radically change his life. And this guy lived in Arizona, but he had come from the Midwest. And his family that he grew up in was a very moralistic, judgmental, super Christian, we are right, righteous kind of family. And he had to get away from that because it just was driving him crazy. And his mother was the worst practitioner of it. But he was still close to his aunt. And the family had a lot of money. And the aunt was the oldest daughter. She'd never been married. She inherited the family house, which was this big mansion, like 12-room mansion in Milwaukee. And she had a fair amount of money, but she never married. But she was a kinder version of the Christian stuff than this guy's mother, who was very moralistic. You must do this. This is wrong. You're bad. The aunt was more charitable. So she lived her life alone but happy with friends and things like that. But in recent years, she'd been had some illnesses, and she was getting up in years, and she was in a wheelchair. She'd had the house converted to wheelchair accessibility, again, rare in those days in the 50s. And she put in an elevator because there were 3 stories. And she used to spend her days doing charitable works, going to church, and then doing volunteer work in the community. But now she couldn't get out because the world wasn't wheelchair accessible. So he'd been taught, this guy, Erickson's former patient, had been talking to his aunt and thought she sounded like she wanted to give up. Depressed, kind of suicidal, vaguely suicidal. So he said, Dr. Erickson, I know you're going to Milwaukee to give a lecture. I wonder if you could see my aunt, see if you can help her. Typical Erickson. Sure, I'll see her. You'll be there for like a day. You'll see her for a couple of hours and see if you can sort out her major depression. So Erickson, after his lecture, goes to the woman's house. Her nephew has warned her that this guy is coming, and he's praised Dr. Erickson as this genius and this amazing guy. So she opens the door. She's in the wheelchair. Erickson, walks with a cane at this point. He's had polio early in his life. So in the 50s, 2 people who are handicapped, as they called them then, kind of bonded instantly. She was like, okay, this guy's all right. You know, he knows what's going on with me because we're in the same tribe. So she invites him in, and as usual, you know, as people do, what sometimes you come over, she gives him a tour of the house. It's this amazing house, but she keeps all the shades drawn because she's embarrassed about being in a wheelchair. So she's very isolated. She has a couple of people who work for her or do errands and will drive her places. But she confesses to Erickson she used to be pretty active in a church. Now it's hard to even get to church because no wheelchair accessibility. Sometimes, every once in a while, when she gets the wherewithal, she has somebody drive her to church, carry her up the steps, put her in the back of church, but she doesn't interact like she used to. So again, very isolated. And she used to do charitable works, but she doesn't get out to do that much anymore. So finally, she ends the tour and tells Erickson this is her pride and joy. The greenhouse, the plant nursery that's attached to her house. And Erickson grew up in a rural area. He loves nature, he loves plants, and he shows a great interest. And he looks up on the shelf, and there's all these small pots. He said, what are those? She said, well, you see this plant on the potting table? That's my African violet plant. That's the original one. There are 20 cuttings that I have from that, and is really hard to grow cuttings for an African violet plant, but I've been able to do it. I have quite a great thumb. So Erickson says, you know, your nephew thinks you're depressed. She said, well, yes, I think he's right. I have been rather depressed recently. He said, I don't think that's right. I think that diagnosis is wrong. I think that you haven't been a very good Christian. Well, again, she comes from the very judgmental moralistic family. That gets you.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you mean? You know, and she gets kind of her back up, and he says, what I mean is you've got this amazing talent with plants, this green thumb. You've got all this time. You've got all this money. What I recommend is you get your church bulletin newsletter, church membership list, and anytime you see an announcement in the church bulletin about a birth, a death, a graduation, a happy or sad event, somebody in the community, in your church community's life, you get that guy who drives you on errands. You repot that one of those African violets into a gift pot, take it over to their house with your Christian and human presence, and wish them congratulations or condolences. Bring your congratulations or condolences. She said, well, I guess you're right. I have rather fallen down on my, Christian duties. So she's not offended anymore. When I'm studying with Erickson, he sends me to his bookshelf after he tells me that story, has me bring down a scrapbook, opens it up, and there's an article from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. The headline is, African Violet Queen of Milwaukee dies, mourned by thousands.
Wow.
They couldn't fit the people into the church. I mean, this tears me up when I tell it because it was so touching to me at the time. And they couldn't fit the people into the church that wanted to come to a memorial service because everyone knew her. She'd been so funny. And I was like, okay, this is, again, different from the psychology and psychotherapy work that I'm figuring. But again, you see the theme? She had all the resources she needed. She had her Christianity. That was her value.
Yep.
Whether Erickson was a Christian or not, didn't matter. It's crazy. She had a green thumb. She had time on her hands and she had money. Yep. And she had this guy who would drive her around. All the resources she needed to solve her problem of isolation, meaninglessness, depression, everything she needed, not antidepressants. And for me, it was like, and then when I got into the hypnosis, which I know you're interested in, it was evocative hypnosis, not reprogramming hypnosis, which was a revolution for me because I always thought hypnosis, you're trying to either rework old traumas and resolve them that are non-conscious and that are running the show from beneath, or you're going to reprogram bad and unhelpful beliefs. Which, that's a fine thing to do with hypnosis, but Erickson was working at a whole different place. He believed you had those alternate beliefs. All you had to do was evoke them. He believed you had a non-depressed biochemical state that he could evoke if you were depressed. He believed you had calm as a background, and you've been calm millions of times in your life. All you had to do was evoke that and link it to the times when you got anxious. And for me, that was mind-boggling. I was like, wow. that is different from every psychotherapy that I know, almost every psychotherapy. Rogers therapy was a little like that. And actually, psychodynamic analytic therapy is about evoking more than it is about reprogramming or guiding the change in that way. So for me, that was like, oh wow. It took me years to sort that out and then years to articulate that, which is partly why I've written 43 books, because I was trying to understand it myself and then explain it to other people.
Right.
Not all my books were about that, but they were about related subjects. And so, that turned me on and got me so excited. I couldn't sit still. I wanted to tell the whole world about this guy and this approach and this, to me, what was a revolution in change.
Absolutely. And you're doing a great job of telling the world and spreading the news. I mean, that's why we're here today. And part of me reflects back. You're talking about the evocation versus the reprogramming, the evocation. And what I've seen in with my clients, they might come in for anxiety or depression, but they leave. It's like a door. And once they open that door, then comes purpose and meaning. And that's the real change.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it that symptom, which looks like you have to get rid of it, it's bad, and you want to excise it, can be the door to the change in your life, to the change in your beliefs, change in your habits, change in your feelings, change in your memories. I mean, it can be the doorway in instead of trying to get rid of that. Can you use it as the entryway for change? And that to me, there was a valuing of the whole person, and even the negative stuff, that anxiety, that hopelessness, that fear, that anger, whatever it may be. I mean, sorry, I'll tell you another quick story, and that is,
Yeah.
a guy who his wife is desperate because this is in the 40s, and go way back, and he was a small business entrepreneur, but he had a massive stroke, paralyzed with that stroke. And they didn't have any insurance, and even in those days, so he became a charity case in the local charity hospital, and they used him as an example of a hopeless case when they did rounds. The chief, medical guy who was teaching the interns and the residents would say, okay, here's a hopeless case. Stroke victim. He's never going to walk again. He's never going to talk again. And his wife would be sitting there visiting him sometimes, and she would see the flare in his eyes that gets this guy off. And he did have kind of a temper. He was a very self-sufficient man, and this pissed him off. And so one of the residents stayed back, and she said, isn't there anything we could do? He said, no, it really is a hopeless case. The only thing is, I went to a demonstration in medical school by this very weird psychiatrist, and if there's anybody that can help your husband, he was like a miracle worker to me.
Huh?
I would seek him out. Now, they live in California. He lives in Arizona, but she gets his number. She calls him up, explains the situation. He said, bring your husband out, see me, stay at this hotel nearby, rent it for, 2 months. And they still had a little money left. So she did that and drove him out in their station wagon, gets in there, and he tells the wife, you drop him off at the hotel, and then you come and see me, and then a couple hours later, bring him. So she comes to see him. He says, now, I need your cooperation. I'm going to do psychological shock therapy. So I need you to sit calmly and pretend like you approve of everything that I do and that it's not a surprise. He said, it's going to be really hard. Are you strong enough to do this? Yes, I'm strong. I'll do anything for my husband. Okay. Has her drive the husband back. Erickson has a home office. So he has his 2 teenage sons help carry the guy into his office. The husband and wife are sitting there, and he says, My name is Dr. Milton Erickson. Your wife has told me about your situation. She says the doctors say it's hopeless, but I think it's not. I think you're just this. She said your background is Prussian, that your family comes from Prussia originally. I think you're just a spineless Prussian pig. And we found out what those people were like in World War II, where we defeated you spineless Prussian pigs and the Germans. This guy, and the wife is just sitting there in shock. And the husband, he sees that flare of anger and he keeps insulting him. Basically, you've left your family to go on welfare. You stop trying. It's typical of you lazy Prussian pigs. I get it. And, the guy finally flings himself off the chair. Erickson keeps insulting him. The wife is about to get up from Erickson says, just keeps insulting her. Finally, the guy starts with his fingernails to crawl toward the door. He gets all the way to the door. He hasn't moved in a long time.
Right.
Moving inch by inch. The wife is totally freaked out, frozen in just shock. Erickson calls his two sons, hasn't picked the guy up, put him back on the chair while he insults him more. His son, the guy, flings himself off the chair, goes a little faster to the door. It keeps going for 2 hours. And the guy is moving. And then Erickson brings him back for a session of insults every day. And he gets faster and faster getting to the door. Erickson finally lets him get all the way out to the front door. Gets out of the office door, gets out the front door, has his boys come and bring him back. And then the guy tells the wife, take it. Pretty soon he's moving and he's talking to him. No! He's saying, no! And he ultimately, make a long story short, he has the wife take the guy out to the desert, bring along a good book, bring along a nice bottle of water for herself, drop the guy off, and drive 100 yards in front out in the desert. It's hot in the Arizona desert, guaranteed hot. And the guy stumbles and, gradually, long story short, after 2 months, the guy is walking. And so you talk about, okay, what did he have? The only thing he'd see was that flare of anger.
Right.
So he used that to get the guy moving, so to speak. And for me, I'm way too nice guy to do that. Well, when I read that, I got that evocation thing. What does the guy have as his only resource? He's paralyzed. He's poor. He has his wife that's on his side. Mm-hmm. He has anger. So what does Erickson do? He puts those two things together and helps the guy get better. At the end of the 2 months, the guy says to him, again, this is going to choke me up, to Erickson, I love you like a brother.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's my part of me wants to talk about the science of it. Like, why does that work in the brain? Like, I'm thinking like the Oliver Sacks stuff. But the other part of me goes back to the time when I was a preacher before I did all this. And the thing that bothers me the most in the Bible is where Jesus says, and these works and greater shall you do. And I look around in the church and they're not doing these works or greater works. And then you look at
that bit of it.
Yeah. And then you look at Erickson and he's making a guy who was this hopeless case get up and walk again.
Yeah, like Jesus in a certain way. Obviously, that's a little heretical, but using their inner strength and their spirit, their inner spirit. And the fact that Erickson believed they were good. He had a grace model of people. He believed people had abilities and that they were good. For the most part.
Right.
He used to work. Yeah. He used to work with convicts and he would let them stay in his backyard until they got rehab. Amazing.
Someone had asked me that, but when I said that I was going to be talking to you, they're like, ask him if Erickson actually let people live at his place.
He did, in his backyard, and his daughters would make friends with him. And, he had it a couple times. He put on a mattress against warm out in Arizona. he'd give him some food, and until the guy got back on his feet and could get a job. And Erickson had a great interest in criminology. There's other stories about that, but he kept in touch with the people at the prison, and these guys would get out and they re-offend, and they go back in, and he wanted to help them. And he said, if you ever find a case you think the person really has some potential, send him to me and I'll see him for free. So he did. He would see a guy, work with him, and then one or two of them he let live in his backyard. And there was his family. He had 8 kids.
Right.
And they could have killed them all, but he had pretty good discernment, I think, of who was good. He had another guy who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I had the guy move a couple of blocks from Erickson's house, and he had, until the guy was better enough, he had the guy buy get a dog, and the dog had to stay with the Erickson family until the guy was functional enough to take care of it. And Erickson would yell at the dogs so he wouldn't bond with him while they were taking care of him. Make sure he scared him. So when the guy would come over, the dog would go right to the guy and like, oh, that saved me from this mean guy. And so, he did unconventional stuff. I don't know if you remember, this was many decades ago. You probably won't know it, but there was a movie and there was a book called I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, which the psychiatrist enters the inner delusions of one of her patients in the hospital. And she's built this whole world of, of delusional stuff, and is able to enter that delusional world and walk her out of it, connect with her enough to walk her out of it. So very controversial, because, again, people wanted to get rid of these delusions, not join with them. And when this woman, who was the psychiatrist, heard that this group that she was helping as a consultant was using Erickson as a consultant, she said, couldn't you find somebody who was less involved with her patients? So she was criticized for the same thing, but he was way involved with his patients. Yeah. He would lose his license these days because he really didn't have those kind of super boundaries that you're supposed to have these days.
And how do you provoke the evocation of that inner person with that in the back of your head, like, oh, I might lose my license?
Well, I mean, you just have to have different ethical standards. Things change, they go along. The doctors used to be God and they could do anything, and all like preachers, but now, yeah, if a bunch of them have clay feet, you probably shouldn't take off your clothes with them, huh? Yeah. That kind of thing.
Right.
So we've learned a bit about the humanness of those people that we used to treat as special and gods, and beyond morality or whatever. Yeah, you just have to do your moral standards for these days. I don't think you need to. I wouldn't do that stuff. I mean, that stuff was radical, and those stories are dramatic, and that's why I chose them to illustrate the point. But you don't have to use those kind of tactics to use that evocation principle. So I learned to use it in my nice guy way, in my guy that didn't take advantage of people or wouldn't piss people off. I don't like that pissing people off. That stuff didn't work for me. So I found another way. And the main way I learned is through an evocative approach to hypnosis, which was different, again, from that reprogramming or uncovering hidden trauma approaches with hypnosis, which are all legitimate things. But so Erickson had it is called an indirect approach to hypnosis, a permissive approach to hypnosis, and an evocative approach to hypnosis. And those are different from the traditional, you will go into trance. Erickson, he was a combination of old style hypnosis, because that's where he learned it. But by the time I studied with him, he was way more permissive. Instead of saying you will go deeply into trance, say, I really don't know how deeply you could go into trance.
Right.
And I don't know exactly how much you'll change from this trance.
Yes.
Implication, presupposition, a very gentle, inviting, permissive way rather than that very directive way of using trance. And the same thing with the therapy parts of it. And he would mix the induction with the therapy. If you go back and watch some of the tapes and listen to some of the audio tapes and videotapes and audio tapes or audios of things, you'll find that when he's starting the induction, he's already starting the treatment. It's not just do induction, then do the treatment, then bring him out. He knew where he was going, if you will. And that's one thing I learned. It was like poetry and art, the kind of structure of that. And again, it took me decades to learn it and to get good at it. And it is a lot like poetry to me. It's the spiritual, it's like poetry, and it's very permissive, and very, and I prefer that. Again, I was a hippie back in the day, and that was more my value.
Yeah. I love the permissive language of the Ericksonian hypnosis, that evocation. And I learned a lot of that through Mike Mandel. Like he's great at teaching that. And I even wonder, like when you work with a client, you're talking about it's like poetry and art. And then a lot of times, at least in my short experience, you get in a client and you think it's going to go one way. You mentioned Erickson had an idea where he's going, but 99.9% of the time, it doesn't go at all according to the way I thought it would go.
I like that. I mean, and again, it's why I like storytelling as part of therapy, because I have an idea what the impact of the story is, and the client will come back and they go, when you said that thing, and I'm like, did I say that? I don't know about that, but they use it as part of change, or I got this out of that story you're telling. I go, that wasn't the moral of that story. Come on. I had a really good moral and you've taken a different one. That I think is really good, because you give them room to do their own therapy, to find their own moral, to find their own resources. And that kind of more permissive presuppositional, I mean, the presuppositional is a little more leading kind of talk, but that permissive talk, I would say you can go wherever you want and do whatever needs to be done in the time and the way that it needs to be done for you and only for you. Now, I don't know where that's going. That's up to me.
Right.
So I'm not quite as strategic as Erickson was. But even Erickson, he would just roll with the punches. If they came in with something different, he would go with that. That was totally okay with.
And it's interesting because you're talking about evoking something from the person and just using that language you just used. It's like, I don't know, but that person knows.
That's the implication, I don't have to know. Something deep inside you knows exactly what you need, exactly how to implement it, and exactly when the right time to deliver to your conscious mind what your unconscious mind already knows how to do, and what your unconscious mind is providing for you. And so that kind of thing, you're doing some technique. One of the things is dividing people into conscious and unconscious. And I don't know if how much you know about or you've studied this kind of stuff, but I use a different voice tone when I talk about conscious, a different voice tone when I talk about unconscious. I use a different spatial positioning when you talk about conscious mind. So I'm helping people divide themselves, dissociate, if you will, which is one of the strategies of going into an altered state. And I'm using strategy on the way to that, but within that, I'm doing a lot of permission and a lot of evocation.
I love that. And one thing that popped in my head, I want to talk about the music in just a moment because there's a lot of that in music, I feel. One thing that popped up is like Jungian talking about the shadow. And then sometimes I associate the shadow with the unconscious. Is that on the right track or?
Well, yes. And here, let me just make a distinction here. Erickson had a more benevolent view of the unconscious than Freud did. And Jung was sort of somewhere in between the two. And so let me explain what I mean. Erickson thought the unconscious was not this Freudian cauldron of repressed urges, the Mr. Jekyll to your Dr. Hyde, it was going to where all the impulses to kill and rape and lie and cheat and, all that stuff. And he didn't see it as starkly as that. He thought that your unconscious was a repository, a warehouse, a storehouse of non-conscious abilities, memories, muscle memories, anything like that, and neurological memories. And so he had a benevolent view of the unconscious. And that's why I was saying, when I do my music, I use my creative unconscious. Now, that's not that Freudian, I want to, the Ozzy Osbourne bite the head off a bat kind of darkness. It's really, tapping into that creative unconscious that knows things that I don't know how to articulate quite yet. And until they become conscious, and I could find a way to get them out in the world. But that Jung stuff, I think, is right. So, a lot of the Ericksonian students used to hear Erickson say, trust your unconscious. Your unconscious knows a lot more than you do. Your unconscious is wise. Your unconscious is smart. And so I would go to the Erickson conferences, and there'd be people like Steve Gilligan, who's a really dear friend of mine, who would be saying that kind of stuff and would spend most of the time putting people in the workshop in trance with that very, gravelly kind of Erickson voice. And I'd be standing up here hyperactive, telling my story. And I was like, everybody else in the Ericksonian thing seems that leaning over to the side of the boat that the unconscious is the big hero. And I'd be like, your conscious mind is great too. Don't diss the conscious mind. And I was representing the conscious mind partly because they were so far over on that side of the boat. I thought the boat was going to tip over. I thought they needed somebody out there. Even though I'm small, I wanted to balance it a little. So here's the way I come to say it. Your unconscious is smart about the things it's smart about. It's dumb about the things it's dumb about. And there's some things that it's smart about that it's dumb to be smart about. So what do I mean by that? So that gets back to the Jungian stuff, the shadow stuff. That is, I had a friend. This is a personal friend of mine. It wasn't a client or a patient. She grew up with a very strict mother. And her mother was a piano teacher. She had two sisters. My friend Erica is my friend. And the mother taught them all piano when they were young. But the mother had a very strict way of correcting mistakes. She would slap them on the head when they make a mistake. She would be in the house doing mother housework tasks, and she would walk by, and if they made a mistake, she'd slap them on the head. She was really tough. And so my friend was the oldest one. And when she was 12, she rebelled and said, I don't want to play piano anymore. The mother said, you will play piano. All my daughters will play piano. She said, I won't. And they had a big standoff, and my friend won that standoff. Now it's years later. My friend is in her late 50s. Erica's in her late 50s. And she thinks, I love music. Why did I let my mother spoil piano for me? I'm going to take piano lessons. Hires a piano teacher. She has a piano that she's inherited from her mother. Sitting in her living room. Piano teacher sits next to her on the bench, gives her something to play. She plays it, makes a mistake, and Erica flinches. And the piano teacher kind of looks at her weird and shows her again, and she plays it again and plays pretty well. And then she makes a mistake, and Erica flinches. And quite, it's really jerky kind of flinch. And after about 5 times, the piano teacher said, what is this about? And she tells her the story my mother used to, and she goes, terrible way to teach piano. The piano teacher says, that won't help anybody learn the piano. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I will never hit you. You don't need to flinch. Didn't matter. Erica flinched every time she made a mistake. And when I went over to her house and I was talking to her about it, she knew I was a therapist. She said, I had to take up the guitar. He goes, I do not have those associations with the guitar. When I make a mistake with the guitar, I just make a mistake and I correct it. But sitting on that piano bench is so deeply ingrained in my in my body that I can't, no matter how much I know this, my mother's not sitting next to me. Nobody's going to hit me. It doesn't matter. So her unconscious is smart about something it's dumb to be smart about. But when she learns to play an instrument very well, like I know how to play guitar really well, I could play guitar while telling these stories. And I could play something complicated on guitar while telling you these stories. Because my unconscious is smart about playing guitar. My fingers know how to play guitar. I don't have to think about it. So that's my unconscious is smart about the things it's smart about. If you ask me to play the clarinet, I wouldn't have a clue. If you ask me to play drums, I would stumble around, but I wouldn't be very good at it. My unconscious isn't dumb about those things. So if you know how to play tennis, you should go out on the tennis court and, like that inner game of tennis guy says, do not think while you're playing tennis. That will get in your way.
Right.
So your unconscious is smart about the things it's smart about, dumb about the things dumb about. And there's some things it's dumb about, the smart about is dumb to be smart about. And there's a fourth category. There are some things that you don't want to know about that are unconscious, that are running the show from underground, and now it's the shadow stuff that you talks about. Make friends with that stuff and make it a little more conscious or make it a little less scary.
I love that. And I'm picturing you're talking about like, and it works with so many things about the unconscious being smart about, like you saying you could play a guitar and still talk. It's like you don't think about it, or like the inner game tennis, like you're in the flow.
Yeah.
And then I'm wondering, how do you teach the unconscious to be smart about that? I look at Malcolm Gladwell, he's like 10,000 hours. I'm like, what?
And you do it, well, so again, let me just, I don't know whether you'll be able to hear this. You tell me if you can.
Yeah, so far so good.
All right. So when I teach people trance fingerpicking. So, fingerpicking is a little challenging for a new guitarist. So a finger pick is just. Now, my unconscious knows how to do that, but I didn't at first. So I would just do it really simply. Like I'll just tell people, read a book or play or watch a TV show or watch, something on social media and do it really slowly. You go. And you'll make mistakes. I won't because I know how to do it, but you'll make mistakes. So just stop when you make a mistake and do it right, but then do it slower. But do it while your conscious mind is engaged with something else as soon as you can. And then start to speed it up. So that's like touch typing. You just have to do it slow, get faster, make mistakes, correct those mistakes. Don't make those automatic. And keep, I have one finger type and I always misspell the word and. I do ADN. I don't know. It's a bad habit I got. So it's unconscious and it happens automatically and I just learned poorly. So you don't want to go faster until you've got it, the basic mastery. Then as soon as you do it again, like anything, you do it again, like giving, when you were a preacher, giving the homily or whatever, you get better at it the more you do it and the more you make mistakes and get feedback, and then you just get automatic, like, oh, it used to freak you out. I got a sermon this Sunday and I don't know what I'm doing, After a while, it's like Sunday morning at 7:00, you go, I better start to work on my sermon,
It's and you said that magic word, the feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the 10,000 hours. People think you just have to do it for 10,000 hours. That's wrong. You have to stretch yourself and then get feedback on whether it worked or not. That's part of that 10,000. And that's the 10,000 hours stretch goal, stretch practice, and feedback on whether it worked or not. So
Love it.
Yeah. And that's learning hypnosis, learning psychotherapy, learning any kind of thing, learning guitar, whatever it may be.
And first, I want to thank you for this time. It's been so enjoyable. And in a moment, we can lead to a little hypnotic gift for the listeners. Is there anything in particular that you want to share now about what you're passionate about or a message that you want to share with everyone who's listening?
Yeah, I mean, over my life, I mentioned before I was shy. I really have changed 3 or 4 major things about I was terrible with money and I've changed my money habits. People can change, your personality can change, your habits can change. And I think that's, I became a psychotherapist partly because I wanted to know how change happened and I was curious about people. And I've learned that there are principles of change, that there are ways to change, and nobody's hopeless. Even when it seems like it's a neurologically deeply embedded or genetically deeply embedded thing, or it's part of your personality. I had a shy personality, and now, as you see, I'm not quite so shy. So I think those things can change, and that's the message. And you just have to find the pathway that works for you and makes sense to you. For me, it was studying with Erickson made me a psychotic optimist. I was a little pessimistic and a little depressive in my younger years, and I became psychotically optimistic. It's like Erickson never met a person that he didn't believe could change. Now, I've met some people that I haven't changed and that I haven't helped change, but I'd rather err on the side of change is possible. Things can get better. Whether things will get better depends on who does what. But yeah, I think that's my message: is change is possible, and you just find the tools so you can change the stuff you're unhappy about.
That's beautiful. And for the people listening that are interested in your books, what of those many books? I think you have a book for every year I've been alive.
Well, I wrote for the year, yeah, essentially.
So what you mentioned about the process of change, if a person is interested in changing themselves, what book do you feel they should start with?
Yeah, Do One Thing Different is pretty good. I have a free one that's out there somewhere. And I think you can buy it for a couple of bucks on Amazon, but it's called A Lazy Man's Guide to Success. And, I was a lazy guy when I was younger, still am sort of at heart lazy, but I sort of, again, changed that. I've become more disciplined. I was a little on the ADD side of the spectrum, and I'm a lot more disciplined now after writing 43 books and 2,500 songs. So I think maybe those two, and I wrote a book called Change 101. The only book I ever wrote when a publisher suggested it. I submitted a book with a colleague of mine who wanted to write a book with me and convinced me to do it. I submitted and they said, no, we don't want that book. But if Bill wanted to write a book about how change happens, we love to publish that. And I'm like, I don't have any ideas about a book. And about 3 weeks later, I'm a really good sleeper. I sat up straight in my bed and I had the outline for the book about the number of ways one could change. And it's called Change 101. And if you're not in the United States, Change 101 just means the basic course. So, Change 101. And I love that book. I think it's a good one.
All right, I'll put the links in there. And when you say you popped up in the middle, it reminded me of Napoleon Hill. And when he's trying to think of the title for Think and Grow Rich, middle of the night, boing.
Let's talk about the creative unconscious. On your tutoring assignment, it goes, it's like a generative AI or whatever. It goes and goes, here it is. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't do that, but I appreciate it. Yeah.
So cool. Thank you again. And all right, I'm curious if you'd like to offer a little hypnotic gift of some sort, whether it's a song or talking or.
Well, let me do both. Let me first do the song, and then we'll do a short trance.
I love it. I love it.
Do a short trance for people. Now, based on. I studied with Erickson. He died in 1980. Again, that'll carbon date me. And I went back I moved from Arizona around that time. And I went back to visit a friend there. And while I was there, I was thinking a lot about Dr. Erickson because of what an influence he had on me. And I worked in his garden. And I wrote this song called Transplants. I worked in your garden. I really grew a lot. Was it the things you taught me? I'm sure that I forgot. So I had to start all over with a garden of my own. I wish that you could see it, the ways that I have grown. Plant a seed and you don't know what will grow, but you'll get what you need. Something inside will know. You gave me room, and now that you are gone, the garden is in bloom. and your seeds will carry on. When winter breezes blow, you might think they'll never end. But every gardener knows the spring brings life again. The darkness and the shadows, the daytime and the night, seeds turn into flowers, their sunshine and delight. Plant a seed and you don't know what will grow, but you get what you need, something inside you knows. You gave me room, and now that you are gone, my garden is in bloom, and it's time to carry on. All right.
That is so beautiful and so touching.
Thank you. And it has some of the themes we talked about.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how music carries a story. It talks to the unconscious.
Yeah.
Just beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And so let's do a little send off for the people that have been listening to this.
Yeah, and a disclaimer for anyone that's hopefully you're not driving and watching this.
No operating heavy machinery that could kill you or somebody else. All right.
Hey, yeah.
Just use your common sense and do this in a setting that's right for you. Right. Okay. And that keeps you safe and keeps other people around you safe. And that's what I'll say in general as I'm starting. So you can just let yourself be exactly where you are and only take in the bits of this that I'm saying that are right for you. And feel free to ignore or transform anything that I'm saying that's not quite right for you in the way that I've said it or invited you to it. And find a better way within you to transform it into something that is valuable for you. So as we've talked during this conversation, one of my articles of faith is that you have the answers within, whatever the questions are, because I don't know the questions. And maybe you don't even consciously know what the questions are. But something deep within you knows those questions, the questions that are relevant, the questions that open up possibilities rather than close down possibilities, the questions that validate you rather than invalidate you, the questions that lead you forward or call you forward into what your calling is, into what your future is, the future that you prefer, not the future that you feared. So you can find a way to trust the deepest parts of yourself, to gather the resources that are there, that you've learned through mistakes, through successes, through watching other people and modeling on the people, both negative models that you don't want to be like, and positive role models that you'd like to be like. And all that learning within you is available for the next steps that you need to go to the next place that's right for you. And if anything in this conversation really spoke to you in a non-conscious way, sort of sparks some interest or passion, intrigue, you can follow that in a way that's right for you, a way that honors both your past, your present, and even invites you into a future that works for you, a future in which things get resolved, new learnings are possible, new successes are possible. So even if you don't think that anything's happened or that you haven't gone any place or the trance hasn't happened, at this point, I just invite you to reorient back to the present time, present place, to you and your body, in a way that's right for you, and at a rate and pace that's right for you in the next minute or two in clock time. as much inner time as you need to reorient to the present, to you being fully present in the moment and reorient to the external world. You can open your eyes, come all the way back if your eyes have closed.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. It was nice to know you and nice to have a conversation with you.
And thank you for being one of those positive role models for me.
Very kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, so it's definitely something to live up to and grow. Maybe I can be the next gardener, proverbial gardener, and carry on the legacy.
Please do. Thank you. And goodbye to everyone who listened. Thank you for giving us your time and your attention. And you can tell we're both passionate about this kind of stuff. So appreciate you coming on to Ryan's podcast and listening and letting us influence you a little.